When the Willow Grove HOA decided to barricade my entire driveway with 5 enormous shipping containers, they had no clue they'd just ignited a war with their own landlord. How would they react when they realized the unassuming homeowner they'd been tormenting for months was the very person who owned the building where they collected their precious HOA fees? I nearly choked on my coffee one morning when I glanced out my front window. There they were, 5 massive, rusty blue metal boxes stacked in my driveway, completely blocking my garage. My car was trapped inside, and I had a meeting in 40 minutes. What in the world is this? I yelled to no one, racing outside in my bathrobe and slippers. The containers towered over me, reaching almost to the second floor of my house. My neighbor, Linda, stood in her yard, watering her roses with a smug grin. She wore her usual get-up, khaki pants, a pristine white shirt, and that silver HOA president pin she never removed. "Morning, Tom," she called, far too chipper. "Quite the surprise, huh?" I stormed over, jabbing a finger at the metal wall. "Did you do this? How am I supposed to get to work?" Linda set her watering can down deliberately, savoring the moment. "The Willow Grove HOA voted on it last week. These containers are being stored here temporarily. We sent notices to everyone." I checked my phone for missed emails. Nothing. "I didn't get any notice," I said. She shrugged. "That's odd. Everyone else got theirs. Maybe check your spam? Anyway, it's just for a few months." Months. My voice broke. "This is absurd. You can't just block my driveway." "Actually, we can," she replied coolly. "It's in the HOA agreement, Section 12.3, temporary use of common spaces for community projects. Your driveway extends onto community property by 4 feet. "That's not true," I snapped. "We measured yesterday," she said, pointing to faint chalk lines on the pavement. Phil and Susan confirmed it. Of course they did. Phil and Susan, Linda's loyal HOA cronies, spent their retirement policing lawn heights and counting Christmas lights. "This is nonsense. I'm calling a tow truck," I said, pulling out my phone. Linda's smile vanished. "That'd violate HOA rules. You'd be fined $500 per container moved without permission. Board meetings tonight at 7. Feel free to complain there." I stood there in my slippers, seething. 5 years I'd lived in Willow Grove. 5 years of petty rules and power plays. Last month, my mailbox was non-compliant green. The month before, my birdhouse was attracting unapproved wildlife. Inside, I called my boss to say I'd be working from home, then contacted every towing company around. None would touch the containers without HOA approval. At noon, my doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Kapoor from across the street, holding a dish of curry. "I brought lunch," she said softly. "I saw what they did. It's wrong." Mrs. Kapoor was the neighborhood's grandmother, here 30 years before the HOA even existed. Over her delicious chicken curry, I vented. "Linda's had it out for me since I moved in, but this is ridiculous." "She does this," Mrs. Kapoor nodded. "Picks one person each year to make an example of. Last year, it was the Hendersons. Their daughter's swing set was too colorful. They left." "Well, I'm not leaving," I said firmly. "I've worked too hard for this house." After she left, I rummaged through my office for my property documents. The HOA agreement was a tome of rules. As I skimmed it, my phone pinged with an email from my property management company, a monthly rent summary for Crestwood Investments. I opened it distractedly, still reading HOA bylaws. The list of tenants scrolled by, and one name stopped me cold: Willow Grove Homeowners Association. Wait, what? I scrolled back. There it was. The HOA rented their office in a nearby commercial building I'd bought through my company, Crestwood Investments, 8 years ago. I laughed until tears streamed down my face. They had no idea their landlord was me, Tom Bennett. My property manager handled everything through the LLC. They'd never connected the dots. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Susan. "Your porch planters exceed height limits by 2.5 inches. $150 fine added to your dues." I stared at the containers, then my criminal planters, then checked the HOA lease on my laptop. Their renewal was due in 27 days. The 7 p.m. meeting was going to be a blast. I straightened my tie before heading to the community center, walking, since my car was still hostage. Neighbors shot me sympathetic glances. Some avoided eye contact, scared to show support. The room was packed. Linda sat up front with Phil and Susan, shuffling papers like they ran the world. Susan's tight blonde bun didn't budge as she nodded at Phil's whisper. I slid into a back row seat. Mrs. Kapoor waved discreetly. Let's call this meeting to order, Linda announced, tapping her gavel dramatically. First item, the new container storage project. A slideshow popped up, Willow Grove Community Enhancement Initiative, with a generic photo of smiling kids. We've partnered with TransPeak Shipping, Linda beamed. They're paying us $2,000 monthly to store containers on community property. Phil added, this will fund new street signs and security cameras. A man up front asked, where are these containers stored? They're blocking Tom Bennett's driveway. All eyes turned to me. Mr. Bennett's driveway extends 4 feet onto common property, Susan said, reading from her clipboard. Section 12.3. I measured my property today. I cut in. My driveway's fully mine. I've got the survey here. I held up the paper. Nothing in the agreement lets you block my home. Linda cleared her throat. It's temporary community storage. Was there a vote on my driveway specifically? I asked. The room shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Larson, 2 houses down, piped up. I don't recall voting on whose driveway got blocked. It was an executive decision, Phil said sternly. Leadership means tough calls. I walked to the front. So, you signed a deal to make money storing containers, and you picked my house without asking me. The community's needs outweigh one person's inconvenience, Linda said. Except mine, I replied. I can't use my garage or car. Susan sniffed. Maybe carpool for a bit. Murmurs spread. How long will they be there? Someone asked. 6 to 8 months, Phil said. The room erupted. Even for rule-obsessed Willow Grove, this was too much. I raised my hand until it quieted. One question. Do you all know who owns the HOA office building? Confusion rippled. Susan frowned. Crestwood Investments is our landlord. Why is that relevant? I smiled. Just curious if you've met the owner, since your lease renews next month. Linda's eyes narrowed. We deal with a management firm. This is off topic, Mr. Bennett. Is it? I set my business card on their table. Tom Bennett, CEO, Crestwood Investments, LLC. The room went dead silent. Susan picked up the card, hands shaking, and showed Linda. Meeting adjourned, Linda croaked. We'll continue later. As people filed out, buzzing with excitement, Mrs. Kapoor caught me. You own their building? For 8 years, I grinned. They never checked who's behind the LLC. Phil approached, tense. This changes nothing. The container deal's signed. Interesting, I said. I was just thinking how the HOA office might need renovations. One's requiring tenants to vacate for, say, 6 to 8 months. His face paled. Just an idea, I added, smiling. I'll sleep on it. My phone buzzed as I walked away. This isn't over, Bennett, from an unknown number. I glanced back. Linda, Phil, and Susan huddled, glaring my way. The containers still blocked my driveway, but they didn't sting as much. The real fight was just starting. The next morning, engines woke me. I rushed to the window. 3 news vans lined my street, reporters filming my driveway, a drone buzzing overhead. My doorbell rang nonstop. I opened it to a microphone in my face. Mr. Bennett, Channel 5 News. How's it feel to be trapped by your HOA? How did you? I began, but she plowed on. Sources say the Willow Grove HOA blocked your driveway with containers. True. My phone exploded with texts. You're on TV. Linda's losing it. Still in pajamas, I stammered. Yes, it's true. Within minutes, I'd done 4 porch interviews. Social media lit up with hashtag HOA horror and hashtag container chaos. By noon, the HOA's phone was swamped. I knew because Susan called, furious. What have you done? We're getting calls nationwide. I didn't call the press, I said honestly. Maybe someone from the meeting did. This hurts our reputation, she hissed. Tell them it's fixed. Is it? I asked. 5 containers are still here. She hung up. My lawyer, Rachel, arrived at 2 p.m., dodging reporters in her sharp suit. You've stirred the pot, she said inside. I showed her my property docs and the HOA lease. Can they legally block my driveway? No, she said, scanning the papers. They're violating emergency access codes, for one. You can tow them. She tapped her pen. But this lease is juicier. It's up soon, and as landlord, You've got leverage. I don't want to evict them, I said. Just stop the power trips and move these containers. Rachel smiled. Then let's draft new lease terms. As she worked, Mrs. Kapoor slipped in through the back. It's chaos. Linda called an emergency meeting tonight. They think you planned this media storm. I sighed. I didn't call anyone. Did you? She smirked. My grandson might have posted on TikTok. He's got followers. I laughed. Quiet, Mrs. Kapoor, a social media rebel. More news, she whispered. TransPeak Shipping called Linda. They're threatening to ditch the container deal over bad PR. That explained the crash I'd heard from Linda's house earlier, probably a vase. By evening, reporters camped outside, fueled by pizza someone ordered. My phone rang nonstop, neighbors, news, even a producer wanting story rights. I dressed for the emergency meeting, business casual, no gloating. Phil snapped photos of my house as I walked to the center, pocketing his phone when he saw me. The room overflowed, even with folks from nearby neighborhoods drawn by the news. Linda, Phil, and Susan sat up front, grim. This emergency session addresses the container situation and media attention, Mr. Bennett orchestrated, Linda began. Susan pointed at me. He's behind it. Boos rang out. I didn't call the media, I said calmly. But the containers are real and illegal. Phil held up photos. We've got proof they're on community property. Your fence is 2 feet over the line. Murmurs spread. They were flipping the script. Then a voice cut through from the door. Actually, I've got proof. Mr. Friedman, the county surveyor, and my old poker pal, stood with maps. I checked Tom's boundaries today. His driveway's fully his, and the HOA's encroaching with these containers. Phil's face reddened. Your friend's covering for you. Mr. Friedman's the county surveyor, I said, questioning his integrity. Linda whispered to Susan, who texted furiously. The TransPeak deal required specific placement, Linda insisted. So you chose money over my home access? Mrs. Larson asked loudly. Others agreed. The mood shifted. Susan stood, shrill. This is about Tom's vendetta. He's threatening our lease. I haven't threatened, I said. But as your landlord, I'm worried about how this HOA runs. You it being our landlord. Phil yelled. No conflict till you block my driveway, I said. I've been hands-off for 8 years. Rachel stood, handing them our proposal. My client offers fair lease renewal terms. They scanned it, fuming. Blackmail, Linda hissed. Negotiation, Rachel corrected. He doesn't have to renew your lease. Mrs. Kapoor stood. Let's all see these terms. It affects us. Copies circulated, fewer petty fines, annual board elections, community-voted rules. The crowd buzzed. Linda banged her gavel. He can't dictate our HOA just because he owns the building. He's not, Rachel said. You can find a new space if you'd rather. How much is rent? Someone shouted. Where's that money from if not our dues? Linda paled. Finances were supposedly open, but few had seen them. Then the doors flew open. A TransPeak worker stormed in. Which ones, Linda? Move these containers now. This PR mess voids our terms. Chaos broke out. Susan's phone buzzed. She whispered to Linda and Phil, their faces dropping. Linda approached me, strained. Let's talk privately. I'm good here, I said. Transparency's overdue. Susan hissed. The city's citing us. Containers break codes. No permits. Which you knew, I realized. Phil looked away. Linda cracked. Fine, we'll move them, but your lease demands are absurd. I glanced at neighbors airing years of HOA grief. They don't think so. Or here's another option. I'll sell you the building. Fair price, good financing. No landlord to fear. We can't buy it. Susan snapped. With all those fines and container cash? Mrs. Kapoor asked sweetly. Silence fell. Linda's nails dug into her palms. This isn't over, she whispered. You've no idea what you've started. As the meeting dissolved into audit talks and election plans, the TransPeak guy assured me, your driveway's clear by morning. We're done with these clowns. I nodded, but unease lingered. Outside, Phil made an angry call, turning away when he saw me. Rachel warned, great win, but stay sharp. They don't let go easy. Walking home, a red dot flickered on my door, then vanished. Kids with lasers, I figured. But a note waited. Property records go both ways. What's Crestwood hiding? A chill hit me. My office held files on all my properties, Some bought legally, but questionably. I locked the door. The fight had just turned uglier. Days later, the containers were gone, but tension hung thick. Mrs. Kapoor brought samosas one morning. You're battling alone. It's not right. My home hasn't felt mine in years. Her words sparked an idea. What if we just talked to everyone? No formal meeting, just neighbors. By Sunday, my backyard buzzed with families. Kids ran wild. Adults shared HOA horror stories. Fines for veggie gardens, stolen flags, denied decks. What do we want instead? A new guy, Mike asked. Safety and kindness, not control, I said. Rules that help, not hinder. Who decides them? Someone called. Mike's teen daughter piped up. What if everyone takes turns, and no one rules too long? Ideas flowed, rotating roles, clear votes, fine limits. As night fell, real bonds formed. That night, Susan texted, I never meant to be the villain. Power changed us. Was it real regret or a ploy? Next morning, Phil oversaw workers turning the containers into a community garden. Board approved it, he said, avoiding my gaze. Susan's idea, genuine shift or PR stunt. Seasons passed, and Willow Grove bloomed anew. Newsletters became friendly tips, not threats. Susan and Mrs. Kapoor bonded over tomatoes in the container garden. Linda left. Phil stayed distant. Susan worked hard to prove herself. At the budget meeting, I stayed quiet, letting neighbors debate. Phil shook my hand after. I thought rules made a community. It's the people. Our summer block party was chaos. Kids everywhere, purple doors, unpermitted ramps, my 12 planters thriving. Susan offered me a cookie. Grandma's recipe. Never shared it till now. Why now? I asked. She smiled at our messy, vibrant neighborhood. Some things are better shared. The cookie was sweet, imperfect, like Willow Grove. Sometimes, 5 containers blocking your driveway spark something beautiful.